All right, everyone. Thank you for coming. Here today we have passengers Suzannah Anderson and Garet Cunningham with us virtually, and we'll be introducing them later. We also have the legal team, Daniel Lawrence, Brad Moore, who couldn't be here, Melanie Nguyen, and myself for Hod Sultani. We're going to be talking to you today about the updates in the case, specifically adding Alaska Airlines as a defendant and updating the case with additional passengers that have reached out. This is a case that affects all of us as a community. And so I'll turn it over to Dan Lawrence to tell you kind of just about the updates.
Thank you, Farhad. So we on Monday, Tuesday, I guess, joined Alaska Airlines to this lawsuit. Initially, we had only sued Boeing. And the reason we sued Boeing was because the defect appears to be a Boeing defect, and the CEO of Boeing has essentially admitted as much. We held our fire on Alaska Airlines because at this point, there appears to be no direct evidence that it actually handled the door panel at issue that flew off of Flight 1282. And as the information developed through news media and through further research, it became quite apparent that Alaska Airlines, which has purchased roughly a third, not quite a third, of the 737 MAX 9 aircraft, was surely in a position to know some of the situation with Boeing that has been occurring over the last few years. That is indicative of a really unsettling trend, which the FAA has now identified, NTSB is aware of, Boeing is certainly aware of, and Alaska has now conceded is of deep concern to it and should have been of deep concern to it quite some time ago. This includes the fact that Boeing Aircraft Company is essentially under a deferred prosecution agreement, having paid billions of dollars in fines resulting from the MAX 8 crashes, that there are well-known quality assurance problems. Spirit Aerosystems, which is the supplier of the fuselage, and now we understand the door, which apparently came from Malaysia to Boeing, that these problems have resulted largely from Boeing shifting its focus from engineering safety to creating shareholder value. And unfortunately, pursuit of profit and shareholder value can sometimes impair shareholder value. And it's apparent if we see what's happening on Wall Street, that is a significant concern and should be for Boeing. And with respect to Alaska, these were not mysteries to Alaska. This is all essentially common knowledge within the commercial aircraft industry. And so, given that Alaska has now recently stated, both in writing and by a video message that was telegraphed, I believe, yesterday by the CEO of Alaska to many people, I assume Alaska passengers, including myself, as I do fly on Alaska, as many of us do, that Alaska is now going to be taking the step, feels it important to take the step of putting its own mechanics, its own quality inspectors in the factory with Boeing to make sure that they're doing this correctly. It's clearly been a trend lately to reduce the number of second eyes inspections that are happening in the Boeing factory. They're actually proud of this, and they have published information saying how they're now relying on electronic tools to do the work of humans. They claim those tools are more effective, but clearly, at least in this case, if those tools were used, if there was no second set of eyes on these bolts or on whatever other aspect of the aircraft causes to fail, and we have yet to actually run that to ground, that it didn't work here. The additional issues that our passengers and most people talking about this case that I've talked to are extremely concerned about is the fact that Alaska even allowed this aircraft to fly in the first place. Apparently, as most of us now know, the auto pressure system gave a warning light. It is, as the NTSB has explained, a triple redundant system. And apparently the secondary system took over. The light was checked, but it does make you wonder whether that particular light was going off because of potential air escaping or other pressurization compromises that might have been related to the door panel that flew off. And in that sense, although the pressure system itself may not have overpressurized the aircraft and caused the door panel to blow out, one does wonder whether perhaps it was masking a problem, and whether that's being run to ground by the NTSB, I frankly don't know. Certainly something I hope they're looking at, and certainly something that the airline should have considered instead of simply saying, well, it's not working. It seems to be working, and the light went off, and occasionally we do have these glitches and everyone's good to go. But let's not fly over water, because if a disaster happens, we want to be close to an airport. Of course, if this disaster had happened a few thousand feet higher than it did, none of our passengers would be potentially alive today. And we'd have a much bigger disaster on our hands. This was, as the NTSB has acknowledged, a terrifying event. I think Alaska is reaching out and acknowledging that it is a terrifying event, but they've offered the paltry sum of $1,500 and 3 counseling sessions to passengers, and that's simply inadequate, given that it is a common carrier. And under the law, common carriers have the highest duty of care, the highest, because you are in a device that they operate, that they control, and you have no control over that at all. You're simply sitting in a metal tube at 14,000, 16,000, 30,000, 40,000 feet. And they have the duty to do everything they can to make sure that you arrive safely at your destination. And I know that's their goal. I'm convinced that they do try to do that, but they're not trying hard enough. And our passengers deserve to be compensated for that terrifying experience. And you'll be hearing from them in a moment. So with that, I think I've more or less summarized why we joined the airline. And we have also added a number of passengers. We are getting calls more or less hourly since we filed this lawsuit in the first place. And there's clearly, this is not a one-off where 1 or 2 passengers felt a little bit upset. This was a terrifying event for virtually everyone on board. And I think given the interest in this matter, both nationally and globally, we are seeing how important it is to create safe skies, to assure people we have safe skies, and that although we've had them really remarkably safe for the last couple of decades, what we're very concerned about, and I think what the industry is very concerned about, is that safety has to be its hallmark, or it's simply not going to survive. And they are now, I think, realizing that we are hoping the pendulum's not swinging back in the other direction, where we're focused so much on financial profit and some kind of factory efficiency that we ignore the systems and the judgment that's required to ensure that all the parts of the aircraft are properly installed, are made of proper materials, are properly formed, and are properly maintained, so that we can all assure ourselves that when we put ourselves and our loved ones on an aircraft, that we're not going to have something like this happen again.
And now I want to start off introducing Suzannah Anderson. She was in the front row, the Alaska Flight 1282.
Good morning. Hi there.
Thanks, Suzannah. You want to just start by kind of sharing your story, your experience?
Yeah. I, as you all know, was on the flight 1282 Friday evening, January 5th. And I was seated actually in the first row, the aisle seat, 1C. And I've flown a lot for work, so typically used to the rhythms of the flight and ascent and when we're cruising, etc. And as we started to ascend and began what would have been the routine beverage service, flight attendants came around asking what we'd like to drink. And shortly thereafter, I was reading a book, and I recall that there was a rather very loud explosion, so much so that my ears initially just started ringing really loud. And there was a large amount of smoke, what looked to be white smoke in the plane. I now know it was a mist. And then from there, I heard screaming and I heard crying. I saw the flight attendants struggling to close the cockpit door. And as I was looking through the aisle towards the cockpit, things began to fly into the air, papers, debris, some solid objects. It was pretty chaotic, so it's hard to say what these were. And then at the same time, I could feel that my phone and my coat, everything was being pulled backwards. And I also realized the masks had dropped. I went ahead and to my left, the passenger to my left was putting the masks on, so I went ahead and put one on, and that first mask was working okay. And then I began to try and figure out what I needed to do next. And looking at the flight attendants' faces, it was clear to me this wasn't going to go well. And I work in healthcare, and I've worked in emergency rooms and crisis units out in the field many times. And you know the look when you're not going to make it or a person is not going to make it. And so I quickly realized I need to pivot and start messaging to people to say goodbye. So I sent goodbye messages as best I could after struggling to kind of get onto the Wi-Fi and the messaging app, while in the meantime, the plane was rocking violently and the winds were like being in the middle of a hurricane. And there were no instructions. I could not hear anything. I could hear intermittently somebody screaming. I think I heard somebody to my right was crying. And I heard a thud. And to be honest, my thought was, there's a part of the plane that's missing. We've hit something. And I didn't know if it was a wing, it was the tail, but the force pulling backwards was so strong. I knew that something big was open. So I went to send messages and sent my son a message letting him know that he was and has been the best part of my life. And he did respond back, thankfully. Unfortunately, during that time, there were my husband and a few other people I could not get through to. And I know that was one of my biggest thoughts, was the grief that I wouldn't get to say goodbye. And so anyhow, once the explosion had happened, along with the wind, along with the smoke, along with the chaos and the debris in the air and screaming people and watching the flight attendants struggling to get the door closed in the cockpit and struggling to get into their own seat, I decided that this was, when I would need to just come to terms with this being the end. So from there, we were descending really fast, and it wasn't a gentle descent. It did not feel like that at all. And you only have so much time. And I recall that as we were descending really fast, I looked to my left to the woman, and she was crying, and I could see we were both shaking, and things were flying all around us. And we didn't have any information as to what happened in the very front of the plane, as you can imagine. Couldn't see it, but could certainly feel something really big had happened in the rear of the plane or towards the back. And the time that I knew we were starting to land, didn't know if there was anything that was on fire, had no idea if even our landing would be safe. And once we landed, initially weren't even sure where we landed. And I wasn't sure if we were actually if we were in a safe at this point, because we didn't know if we were going to catch on fire, etc. It wasn't until the actual firefighters came on board to start tending to the people who had been injured and to take them off the plane that I realized, okay, we're safe. The firefighters wouldn't come on board if we were on fire. So that's my experience as far as on the plane. And from there, we did taxi towards the gate, and I was towards the front, so I got off the plane initially, and there was nobody there to greet us or say anything to us. There was no direction. So I walked over to a desk and I asked where to go, what to do. And they looked at me a bit confused and then pointed towards a customer service location. So went and spoke to an agent. And by the time I turned back around, the line behind me was 150 people deep, as you can imagine. And so from there, it was just a big blur, and I could not get my luggage back. I did not want to fly, of course, that evening. I was just completely in shock. And my luggage was not available due to the flight, I was told, being under investigation. I did see a few people in the luggage area who did, with Alaska, did at least express concern and seemed to be very moved and empathetic to what had just happened. So that is the events as they were that evening for me.
Thanks, Suzannah. And I want to turn it over to Garet, another passenger in more of the middle of the plane.
Hello. So yeah, I was in actually row 28, the aisle seat. And so for me, a little bit different in terms of, so yeah, a quick little jump from, Portland to Ontario, California. Put my head back, eyes are closed. And at that point, I kind of felt like I get a little rest. I remember the pilot stating that we had just crossed 10,000 feet. And as soon as the plane kind of, evened out, we'll go ahead and get the seatbelt signs off and the lights off and whatnot. And a couple minutes later, I hear this boom. And then like a gush of air, I look to my left and part of the plane is gone. My first thing was it didn't make sense. My brain couldn't compute what I was looking at. It just did not make any sense. The fact that part of the plane was gone. Quickly after that, the oxygen masks had dropped. So I've got that to my face. I don't really feel any oxygen coming in. Now I'm waiting for what's going to happen. Was someone in that seat that was right by the opening? What else is going to fly out? And then after that, and we're talking like second to second, is this it? And like Miss Suzannah was saying, I'm not prepared for this. I wasn't prepared to die on this flight. It was just going to be a quick flight getting back to Southern California. And so now that's the thought my eyes are glued to that opening. And I'm just wondering what's going to happen next. And just thinking about the fact that this is it. I mean, this is it. I'm looking at a young man just right to my left. And I think he was 10 years old. His mom, who was right in front of me, reaches over, grabs his forearms. That was something. And yeah, you're just, again, it's so surreal. It just didn't my brain could not fathom the fact that there was part of the plane that was missing at that point. So of course I didn't expect any kind of message over the intercom because you couldn't hear anything except for just the wind rushing. My girlfriend Rasal was beside me and they were kind of holding hands, and everyone's, back there is looking at that opening as far as wondering what's going to happen next. And then when it seemed like, okay, I feel like we're turning around. We hadn't been gone from Portland too long, so I figured we're going to land back at PDX. So I feel the descent. And now I'm thinking, okay, I'm not a pilot, but is that opening being, in that shape, is this going to change our landing? And sure enough, you feel the kind of, the plane do this kind of thing, teetering back and forth. Now I'm thinking, oh boy. So my girlfriend and I kind of interlocked arms there, and I'm ready for whatever is going to happen when we come down, whatever crash is going to happen. You're looking right out. It's nighttime, so you can see the lights, out there, and you're looking right at it. I mean, this thing is 4 feet across and 6 feet tall, whatever it is. And thank goodness that we landed and landed safely. So whatever they had to do to kind of offset, that air coming in there, they did well with that. But yeah, I mean, even at this point, thinking about what happened, it just doesn't make sense that part of the plane came off. My mind just could not grasp what was going on. So yeah, very, very, very wild.
Thank you, Garet and Suzannah. We want to take some time now to turn it over to questions. Let's start off with the people live in the room, and then we'll switch it over to those joining us via Zoom.
I had a question about the oxygen masks that were mentioned in the lawsuit. Can anyone just kind of go a little bit more in detail about, I mean, if their oxygen masks in particular, they felt like they weren't working, or do you know any more about just why some of them didn't appear to be working?
We don't know why. We know that I was actually very surprised at the number of passengers who reported that their oxygen either was not working or did work for a while and then ran out. There's video which I've seen on television, and I've heard reports from our clients that there were flight attendants going through the aisle with oxygen bottles. So which to me suggests also that at least some people's oxygen was not working. One of our clients who's not here on the video today was traveling with her 3 children. We've described this in the complaint. She had a 1-year-old on her lap. She felt like she was about to pass out. Then she remembered that you're supposed to put your own mask on first, which she did, and then put masks on her 3-year-old and her 5-year-old daughter sitting next to her, and then had to try to put a mask on her 1-year-old who's 1 and robust and struggling. And she then felt that the oxygen was running out. And her thought was, if I give my son oxygen and I can at least keep a mask on my 1-year-old's face, then he may be the one that survives. We've had other passengers indicate to us that they had to position the mask in a certain way in order to be able to breathe. And this was not merely a matter of them failing to listen to the instruction that you're supposed to tug the tube, to start the flow of oxygen. We've all heard that speech, your bag may not inflate, but the oxygen is still flowing. Apparently it was not. Now, one thing we're going to, I guess, have to look into is whether, people were aware that they were then on the descent passing under 10,000 feet and perhaps were able to get atmospheric oxygen at that point and perhaps recuperate a little bit as they descended. But certainly before they got to that point, even before that, there were people who were quite concerned that they couldn't get the oxygen. And that, of course, is a matter that I think bears some looking into. And frankly, I think we're the only ones to really have raised that. I've not really heard that from NTSB or FAA or Alaska or Boeing, any explanation as to what all the concerns about the oxygen supply are all about.
About how many passengers reported, or as far as you guys know?
I have not counted, but I would say most of them.
I have a question for the passengers or you guys, but if you could just tell us, why is it important to you that Alaska and Boeing be held accountable and that you get compensation for what happened?
Let's actually turn that over to Garet. I spoke about this with them yesterday, and I thought it was really insightful.
Yeah, so after the plane landed, and I've truthfully never sued anyone, right? And I've always been of the mindset that be part of the solution, not part of the problem, right? So great. So the weekend passes. We get on the plane Sunday. My girlfriend with Alaska. We hadn't really talked about different mode of transportation, but she started to bawl as the flight ascended, and about 20 minutes, and a lot of thoughts going through her mind. We've talked about it since then, but so great. Dire situation. We're getting through it, what have you. And then I start to see some reports coming in. And I think the one thing, and again, I don't believe everything I read or hear, I understand that. But when I found out that this plane was not being allowed to fly over the Pacific, my first thought was, then why in the heck was that plane in the air at all? So at that point, I felt it necessary to reach out to someone about the fact that this really upset me, for myself, for my girlfriend, for everyone on that plane. That really ticked me off big time. You've seen the warning lights come on, there's something going on. So there's something happening. And if you're going to keep it from doing one type of flight, it shouldn't fly at all. So at that point, it became important to me to kind of get together with someone. And then when I called and spoke with Dan on the phone, I was very impressed. And the one thing that helped me, I'm not thinking about money, truthfully. I'm really not. And there's been no talk between myself or any of the attorneys about any kind of competition, any kind of money. My whole thing is Alaska, Boeing, Spirit, whomever needs to understand how important this was. And it's only by the grace of God and 10 minutes that I'm still here. Because 10 minutes later, I wouldn't be here. So for that fact, and knowing that they were aware that there was something going on, this awareness needs to be out there. So that's my reason for being involved.
I would say one thing in follow up to that, if I may, and that is that it is rare that we have an event like this where people survive, where we know that people are terrorized as the aircraft is descending. We've seen numerous major aviation disasters. Obviously, the most recent one's the MAX 8. Before that, there were any number of them. And it is always an element, frankly, of the litigation to have the jury assess what the value is of people's pre-death pain and suffering. Luckily, here, there's no death, luckily. But what we are hearing here is what that is really like. This is not an amusement park ride where your throat gets closed a little bit and you're scared. This is the fear of real death. This is being faced with the Grim Reaper staring you in the face. And I think you've heard that from our passengers. And that is a long-term, can be a lifelong situation. You may not ever fly again. The loved ones that you want to see may be unable to see you or less able to see you because of that. The people that you travel with and enjoy your life with may not be able to go where you would have wanted to go because you simply can't get on an airplane or you have a fear of flying. All of these things this is an extremely traumatic event. And again, the NTSB has acknowledged that. So it is important, I think, that the airline, as well as the manufacturer, realize you can't be a day late and $1 short in this process, and you certainly can't put that dollar in your own pocket and make that happen.
At what point did the warning light go on? Was the plane already in transit?
I actually just want to touch on one more thing.
Yeah, we don't know. To answer your question, we don't.
Just one more thing. Speaking with other passengers that couldn't be here for various other reasons, most of which have to do with the trauma of the flight. But a lot of them shared with me that this is about our community and making sure that we stop putting profits over people. And if that calculus needs to change somehow, this is the only way to do it. So I just want to, again, shout out Suzannah and Garet for being here, but a lot of other passengers couldn't because of what they went through.
Can you give a rough estimate of how many passengers you have with these additional ones?
Yeah, so we have about
13 in the case.
Yeah, that were added, but we have probably around 17 that have retained us. We're in contact with about 15 more that are in various levels of discussions about being involved.
And then I'm not sure who to direct this to, but Suzannah mentioned when she got off the flight, there was no one to greet them, and we know about the $1,500 thing, but what has kind of been the communication from Alaska to the passengers throughout this process, other than the $1,500?
I think I can address that. Alaska's attorney reached out to me. We've had a conversation. We know each other from previous relationship, and she wanted to indicate that simply for purposes of creating a bit of a buffer between the airline and the passengers, that those communications would go through the attorneys, and they have been. So some people purchase their tickets and the airline may not have their address because it might have been purchased through a third party or what have you. So some people have not even received the offer of compensation. We're trying to facilitate that process. So if any of our clients have not received that offer and it's not tied to a release, at least that's what we've been told, then we're happy to facilitate that. And that is one thing that we are doing.
And just one more to that. I think a lot of the frustration was how Alaska handled this right after. So there was no room where all the passengers could go. They were told to go to a line. There needs to be a process and where they're taken care of immediately and communicated with. We had families of unaccompanied minors hear only from their son what had happened. Their son was texting with them while this was happening, and they drove straight from California up to Portland to pick him up.
Yeah, I guess that would be my real question. Do you think the response has been sufficient from Alaska? I guess I know the answer, but
Yeah, I think they're trying to correct it now.
You guys mentioned that you know the lawyers, or I don't know how you know them. Don't study law or anything, but could this possibly be a conflict in interest or?
No, I don't think so. No, certainly they haven't raised it, and I don't think there would be any conflict at all.
Are you including Spirit in the lawsuit at all?
We've not yet done that. That could be done. We may join them, but frankly, Boeing's already said the buck stops with Boeing. And, unless Boeing decides to try to point the finger at Spirit Airlines and eschew its own responsibility, that would, at this point, doesn't seem to be a reason to do that. Again, it does seem that Boeing is acknowledging that it could have done better here. I think Alaska, through its recent statements, is also indicating that it could have done better here. There's no reason why the things that they're doing now couldn't have been done sooner. All the same reasons. The only thing that's different is that this particular incident occurred when it should not have.
Can you clarify when you said earlier about Alaska being aware of these issues previously? Like, I guess I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember exactly what you said, but you said something about they were aware of the issues with Boeing, before obviously this happened.
Yeah, we've laid that out in our amended complaint, but in summary, Alaska is a major purchaser of this particular aircraft. Certainly was aware of the MAX 8 issues. They are not an unsophisticated party. It's not like somebody going into Best Buy and not knowing what's in front of them. These are people who know airlines and who are airlines and know aviation manufacturing and are keenly aware. There are publications in the industry. I worked in the aerospace industry before I went to law school. You get a lot of information on a daily basis about what's going on, both for the better and for the worse in the industry. And it's no secret, again, Boeing was criminally prosecuted in the state of Texas in federal court for lying to the FAA about the MCAS system. A fine was imposed on it. Spirit Airlines has been under criticism within that industry. Many lay people may not know about that just because they don't pay attention. They're not in that industry, but the industry does know. Boeing, I think it was the head of Boeing Commercial Aircraft, was then sent to Spirit to essentially take over for the CEO, who I believe was terminated. So this is a relatively small community. Boeing is really now the only commercial aircraft, major airliner company in the United States. McDonnell Douglas is sort of absorbed into Boeing. Lockheed doesn't make commercial aircraft anymore for public travel, and so it's Boeing and Airbus. And Alaska made a decision to scuttle its Airbus aircraft and buy the Boeing MAX 9. And when you make a decision like that, you know what you're doing. You should know what you're doing, and you should know what's going on with the people that are making it. And
let's actually turn it over to questions via Zoom right now. Please just raise your hand in the reaction function and we'll shift it over. All right.
This is for Suzannah and Garet. Can you talk about how you feel seeing these incremental updates coming out about the investigation? It's seeming like there's not going to be answers anytime soon. How do you feel watching all of that?
Suzannah, do you want to start off?
Sure. It's actually really disappointing, frankly. As a consumer passenger, the feeling that we are left in the dark and we're really not included in the messaging up front has been really disheartening. And even from the beginning, calling this a mistake, I would not be here. So it's been very frustrating to find that as information is unveiled, that there was clearly a lack of assurance of safety on multi-levels here. And I know that's historically been the case. And here we are essentially rinse and repeating in many ways. And so it's really upsetting. And it's re-traumatizing, frankly, to keep learning how close we were to, honestly, to dying.
Garet, do you have some thoughts to add?
Yeah, same thing. I'm very upset each time I find out more and more things about it, and how the fact that, be it negligence, be it whatever the case may be, that this to me was something that shouldn't have happened. That plane should not have been in the air, and that's extremely upsetting. Yeah.
This is for Suzannah and Garrett as well. I mean, at this point, will you ever fly again? Will you ever get onto a plane again?
Not with Alaska for now.
Garrett?
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, I'm going to take them off my list. I mean, I'm kind of forced. I want to. To me, it's just a matter of the companies involved did not make sure that that plane was able to fly safely.
I think there's an issue here of regaining trust. That's clearly what the airline is trying to do. You know, I had one more other thought crossed my mind that I intended to mention earlier, and I believe it was only a day before this happened, or maybe a couple of days, that it was reported that Boeing had asked the FAA to allow it to fly aircraft, knowing that the cowl on the engine may come off if the pilot forgets to turn off the heat designed to keep ice off of the engine. And that could happen in flight. It could injure or kill passengers if it permeated the fuselage. It could damage wings. It could damage the tail. It might even get sucked into the engine and create a catastrophe that way. We've heard about the loose bolts in other control systems, not this particular door, that were known before and have been, and you know, United Airlines has found loose bolts. And so all of this is really, whether or not it has any direct relationship to this particular incident, it's one of the situations where really the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We have a situation where the public confidence in aviation has been shattered and needs to be rebuilt. And it is shocking, frankly, to me that companies that have been perceived as the leaders in their field, certainly Alaska Airlines is a popular airline around here. Boeing is a popular company. They employ a lot of local people. For the good of the local economy, for the good of the flying public, for the safety of all of us, they need to be paying much closer, proactive attention to the quality of their products.
And I think that concludes everything. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Suzannah and Garrett.
Yeah, thank you.
Just a technical question.
Yeah.